and welcome to our viewers over the internet. It's my pleasure to introduce this series of talks on One Health. And in order to start, I will just briefly introduce what we are trying to achieve here. So it's been obvious that over last couple of years, there's been a large emphasis on One Health. There's a lot of research going on in this area. A lot of researchers are trying to look at animal and human and environmental health using different approaches, incorporating everything under some conceptual framework. Others are trying to collaborate and advance their own projects in one or more of these areas. And in order to somehow celebrate that and make people aware of what's going on, we decided to initiate this series of talks on One Health and to see what is going on in different areas of the university, different areas of the on campus. So as you can see here, there will be a series of talks on One Health. The first one is today, but we're also going to have for the next 3 Thursdays, March 31st, April 5th, and April 7th, we are going to have a series of talks on One Health. So everybody is welcome and everybody is encouraged to participate in these sessions. Since we have a full day today, I will briefly introduce our speakers. So we have 4 talks today, or 4 speakers, organized in 2 blocks. The first talk is going to be done by Dr. Daniel Gillis and Oliver Cook. Briefly about Dr. Gillis, he is an assistant professor and statistician in the School of Computer Science, co-founder of Farm to Fork, and co-creator of the ICON transdisciplinary classroom. His research spans public health and ecological risk assessment, methods for alternative data collection, and community-engaged and transdisciplinary pedagogy. Oliver Cook is a master's student in the School of Computer Science and one of the lead developers of the Farm to Fork project. In 2015, Oliver received the Guelph Mercury's 40 Under 40 Award and the University of Guelph Student Life's Be the Change Award. He is currently working with the community of Wrigley, Labrador to develop an eco-health monitoring system using participatory design methods. And my understanding is that they will tell us something about zeros and ones in One Health, and we are all excited to hear it. Please welcome our speakers.
Magic. Okay. Is this good?
Very good.
Awesome. Okay, so thank you all for coming. Once again, my name is Dan Gillis. As Bonimir said, I am an assistant professor in the School of Computer Science. My background is actually in statistics and mathematics, and I somehow found my way into the School of Computer Science and in a bunch of really weird and different projects. And so we're going to talk, Oliver and I are going to talk to you guys about some of the things that we've been doing over the last several years. Oliver, as was mentioned, is a grad student. He's actually my grad student. I've been working with him since 2012 as an undergrad student as part of the Farm to Fork class. So he probably knows too much about me. So what we're going to do today is talk to you about the ones and zeros of One Health. And what I mean by that is computer science and how it has an impact on One Health, all the different types of projects that are going related to One Health. It's interesting, though, because when you actually look up the idea of One Health online, if you go to the One Health website and whatever, it talks about how it's all about collaboration between vets and doctors and so on and so forth to improve public health around the world. The one thing that's missing in the list of collaborators, at least I couldn't find it on any of the websites, was computer science. And now, why do you think that is? Why is computer science not immediately listed in this One Health thing? Any ideas? What do you think of when you think about computers and public health?
Not human.
Well, not human, absolutely. But in terms of tools, what's that? Oh, they do get viruses, yeah. Oh, I forgot to set my timer. That was bad. Anyways, the one thing that people tend to think about when it comes to computers with population medicine, population health, and that sort of stuff is surveys, right? And using tools online to collect data for surveys and all that kind of stuff. And it's not so often that we think about the technology and how it might help in the delivery of public health interventions, and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell you 3 different stories. A story about designing a tool for public health intervention, a story about designing an evaluation of a tool, and then Oliver's going to talk to you about the way we actually go about designing tools for population health and this One Health sort of initiative. So the first story is going to be about this thing called Farm to Fork. Has anybody heard of Farm to Fork? I think a few people maybe. Awesome, good stuff. I hope you've heard of it. So Farm to Fork is a project that started in 2012. It's a project that started, it wasn't intended to be a classroom project, but it started as a conversation I had with a buddy of mine over a beer. We wanted to talk about how we could do something in the community to make the community a better place. Ultimately, we ended up having a meeting and learned about this issue of food insecurity. Now, to give you an idea of how much of an expert I am in the area of food insecurity, when I first heard that term, I thought bioterrorism. I had no idea what it meant. So obviously, there was a lot for me to learn about this. What we learned was that in the city of Guelph, there was this communication issue where we've got all these food providers, but not enough information on what foods that they can receive to give out to the people who need it. So we brought this problem to the students in my 3rd year class. This was Oliver was in this class. It was the first time I taught it. So he got to experience that joy. And basically the students sat around and they tried to figure out how can we solve this communication issue. And it is a public health issue because food security is a huge problem around the world. Guelph, about 16% of the households in Guelph are estimated to be food insecure. So the students came up with this idea of Farm to Fork. And the general idea is built this website that would allow people who could donate to sign up for it, basically go online, figure out what the emergency food providers in town need, and then pledge those things. And the idea there is that there's all these food deserts and such that happen in towns where the inappropriate foods are being donated, and so people are left without fruits and veggies or highly nutritious foods. And we all know that's going to have a huge impact on their ability to lead healthy, productive day-to-day lives. So the website was set up so that you as a donor could go on and know exactly what's needed at your local emergency food provider. Kind of a cool story. So in 2012, they worked on this in the class, and then after that, there was a bunch of students, Oliver being one of them, that stuck around and they kept working on the project for, well, still now. It's an ongoing project that's become sort of a research thing. It was never part of my research goals to start off, and it just sort of has evolved into that. But what happened was shortly after the class, we started this Twitter account so people in Guelph could be familiar with what was going on. And suddenly people from around the world were talking about how can we get this? We want this tool. We thought this was a cool thing for Guelph, had no idea this would be a cool thing for anywhere else. So we're currently working on taking this project and updating the website and making it more functional so that other communities around the world can actually take it and use it for free. How did we build it though? We couldn't, like I already mentioned to you, like I had no idea what food security was. As I said, bioterrorism was the first thing that came to mind. In order for us to build this thing, we had to talk to community experts. It was essential. So we had to talk to people who were in the know in the public health domain, and we had to talk to people in the know who were actually on the ground working with the people who needed the food in the community. It would have been arrogant for us, for me and the class, to come to the community and say, here's your solution, without them even asking or being involved in the problem. That would have been beyond arrogant, and it wouldn't have worked because the community wouldn't have been able to tell us what they could and could not do. And there was a lot of iterations that went on with this project in order to actually make a useful tool that the community could use. Simplification was essential. So we created this tool, and as I said, we had no idea whether or not this was going to be well, we had no idea that this thing was going to go beyond the city of Guelph, which it has, which is great. But we also, because it was just a classroom project, there was no sense of, is this actually going to work in the community, or how do we measure how this thing works in the community? So there was no evaluation protocol built into the Farm to Fork system because we didn't know. So that sort of leads into this idea of building a tool for evaluation. Now, interestingly enough, this project, which is a completely different story, but mingled with Farm to Fork. This started independent of Farm to Fork. It started with a conversation I had with the Public Health Agency of Canada. Probably 2 or 3 years ago, they were conducting a nationwide survey on food consumption. I don't know, maybe some people in the room were called for this survey. The survey had probably like 300 questions on it. It was a phone survey. They would call you up, and I think they needed to get 30,000 people from around the country to answer this survey. They'd call you up and you'd be on the phone for well over an hour answering questions as exciting as, in the past 7 days, have you eaten an apple? If you ate an apple, was it baked? Was it peeled? Was it like, and it's just the most boring questions possible. And you got to imagine that you're on the phone for an hour and something trying to recall all the food you ate in the past week. Personally, I can barely remember what I did yesterday, but that's fine. So there's this issue of public health data needing to come in to be able to do something with. And the idea about behind the food consumption data is that the Public Health Agency wants to use those data to basically be able to help them manage outbreak events. So if they know there are trends in the community of the types of foods being eaten at certain times of the year, certain days of the week, in certain different communities, then if there's an outbreak, they can look at those typical foods that are being consumed and identify this is the likely source of the problem and help narrow down what they're doing. I'm sure they're using it for other purposes, but that's sort of the goal behind it. I was looking at this in this conversation and I was thinking, this is insane. There's no way in hell I'd want to sit on the phone for an hour and a half talking about, did I eat green beans or yellow beans or whatever. So we had to try to come up with a new way of doing this. The fun part about this is that around the same time, I kept seeing on Facebook all of these really random, stupid surveys that, does anyone read the Oatmeal online? Okay, so the Oatmeal has some really ridiculously stupid surveys, like you answer 6 questions and it'll tell you how many weasels you could beat in an attack, or how many zombies you could fight off, all this sort of stuff. Like completely stupid surveys, but they're very entertaining, and tens of thousands of people answer these surveys. So the idea came to mind of, can we make surveys kind of fun somehow? And so this particular work, this alternative data collection program, is looking at how we can actually improve survey design in order to make them entertaining, so people are more engaged and want to come back and provide information to us in a way that they get something out of it, even if it's as stupid as, yes, I ate garlic in the last week, so therefore I can post on Facebook, I will survive the vampire apocalypse. So these are the things that we're trying to look at. Now, the really fun part about this is it tied in quite nicely with the Farm to Fork project. And so I've had a master's student over the last several semesters developing the alternative data collection survey database. And we've launched a food consumption, food habit, and food security survey. We've got just over 300 people who've responded to it so far. And we're testing different gamification methods to see whether or not we can improve survey response by giving back to the user in some way. Because when you're on the phone, once that conversation's over, you get nothing out of it. So this particular survey, this first one that we're starting, his research is actually the gamification element. How do we make the survey fun through computer science? But the fun part is that the data that's coming in can actually be used to help support the Farm to Fork project in terms of an evaluation tool. So the goal is to collect the data before Farm to Fork is implemented in a particular community, understand what the food habits are, what the food consumption habits are, and what the food security levels are, and then introduce Farm to Fork, and following that, do a follow-up survey to see how things may or may not have changed. Because if Farm to Fork isn't working, well, there's no real point in us continuing to pump it out, right? So that's the general idea behind alternative data collection. It's sort of a different One Health project that we're involved in. So there's all these different ideas of evaluation now that we can look at when we're doing certain different projects. But again, going back to sort of something I had said with the Farm to Fork project, is that we can't do any of this without the expertise of the community. Again, I'm not a food security expert. I'm just building some tool that we can put in a bunch of questions. So I did have a public health nutritionist look at the questions that we had put out to make sure they were valid, because I want to make sure the questions were actually getting real good data. but we had to look to experts to work with us. So now I'm going to pass it over to Oliver, and hopefully this will be a smooth transition. And Oliver's going to talk about how we actually go about developing a project using participatory methods. And this is all embedded in the stuff that I've already talked about, but Oliver's going to put it from the context of the work we're doing in Rigolet. All right, here goes the smooth transition.
Let's go in the pocket. I got it. Super smooth. Good to go? Sweet. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Dan. So as you said, I'm going to be kind of going into detail about what I'm doing for my master's, which is involving the development of an app called Inukbook. And ultimately also the importance of good design for software and kind of how we build systems for people so it actually works. So a little bit of context before I actually dig into what Inukbook actually is. My research involves a small kind of Inuit community up in northern Labrador called Gillis. So it's about 300 people. It's there. It's my wonderful Google map, with 95% about Inuit population. So definitely somewhere I never thought I'd go for my master's, but it works out. So one of the things I've kind of come to learn and kind of deeply appreciate about this place and all the people in it is this deep connection between health, well-being, and the land and the environment that they're in. So it's for the Inuit people up there, the land is so much more than just a place they live. It is kind of a source of happiness and culture and survival for them. I won't go into a lot of detail about this. I believe the next presentation goes into a whole lot more about it, but it's perfect. But essentially for what we need to know now is that changes in the ecosystem and climate for what they're doing is kind of having huge impacts on their culture. So what the application that I'm working on is cleverly named Inukbook. Thank you, Dan. Clever name. Is a participatory eco-health monitoring app. So what we've tried to do is equip people in Rigolet with kind of the means to be able to go and collect their own information that is meaningful to them. So what we've done is we've created an app and a website to kind of help them do that. So they can go out and collect all the stuff. So they can map the changes that are occurring and kind of be able to report on data that's meaningful to them. So one of the most important things that I'll be talking about is kind of this participatory design for this. So the idea that we're working with the community to design these things. So it's funny that you said that you don't think of humans in terms of computer science stuff, because to me, that's one of the most important parts of being a computer scientist. As a developer of software, the most important thing to consider is the user, the people who are actually doing the stuff with our tools, because they're only so good without, the users. So, whatever. So we got to know who the users are, why are they using the software, where they're using it. It's all very important. Fortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all, despite One Health being a caption. It's actually a whole bunch of different things, obviously, a whole bunch of nuanced things that need to be considered. So different conditions, culture, effects, what kind of app, what kind of tools and stuff are being developed. So, fortunately, as Dan kind of alluded to, we don't really need to go into this blind. People know what they do. People know what they need to know. So we just need to talk to them. So what we've been doing is, on our trips up to Rigolet, we've been able to kind of go and actually go to land and talk to people and observe the conditions ourselves. So instead of kind of guessing the things, we can actually go and learn the stuff from them. So one of the things, and we always keep learning new things every time we go up. So last time we went up was in February, so it's pretty cold. Turns out up north is cold. So we were skidooing across a lake, and we were all thinking, oh, we have our technology with us, this is perfect. But it all froze and stopped working. So one of the things is someone developing a tool in a system like this that we never would have thought about. I mean, probably should have, but is the concern like that. So there's a whole bunch of different constraints within these systems that we actually have to consider. And yeah. So ultimately, the tool that we're kind of building will hopefully evolve with the people as well as kind of with us along with it. And then it'll eventually address kind of the actual meaningful indicators that they need to collect. So, want to head this off here, Dan?
Sure. All right, so very smooth. Okay, so basically the app and the website that are being developed, as Oliver was talking about, it's to collect the public health and environmental data that's relevant to the community. And as Oliver said, we had to go up there. We've been up there twice so far, and it's been amazing. Working with the community, learning from the community. I've never learned so much in such a short period of time. Chatting with the locals, trying to understand the lives that they live and how, this is falling through, and how what we're designing needs to work for them. If we don't consider their needs, obviously whatever we build is going to be useless. And as Oliver said, the most amazing thing was when we went up, I mean, this should have been obvious, it's cold up there. Our phones aren't going to work, but it was still sort of shocking that we were going out across, it was English River, wasn't it? Yeah, we were going across English River on the back of Skidoos, the sun's setting. It's this amazingly beautiful scene. Like, I've never seen the sunset like this. And all I could think is, I want a photo of this. But there was no way in hell we were taking our gloves off or trying to take a photo. And we should have guessed this, but we needed to consider this now in the design of what we're doing in order to make sure we build something that's going to be useful. So we know now that whatever we build, sure, they can use it in good conditions on the land, but we really are building something so that when they get to their destination, they can talk, like input things that they need to input. It has to be super simple. So we've had interactions with the community to learn about what's important for them in terms of technology, what things that each piece of tech will collect, and then not just that, but what we're giving back to them. Because going back to that alternative data collection thing, making sure people are engaged. If we develop something that's all us asking them for data, even if it's data that they want to collect, it's going to be meaningless. We've got to give something back to them immediately. So the bottom line is that One Health obviously is fantastic in the sense that it's getting people talking about moving public health in really positive directions. But we're sort of here to say, hey, computer science is here too, and we are absolutely ready to help out in any way we can. The most important thing, though, is to recognize that it's not just a tool, it's a design process, and it's all about working with people and in a participatory way to build tools that are actually useful for them. So that's the ones and zeros of One Health. Thank you.
There will be some interesting discussion and questions. We have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions, and then we'll go to the next one.
I actually have some comments and a question. So I liked the point that you brought up at the beginning about not being able to find your particular profession under the umbrella of One Health. A lot of people make that claim. It's something that I think One Health has to start. Maybe there are articles that I've read where I have seen computer science, but not very many. And things like social science being a priority as well. And there is a definition that the EU put out in 2008 that I really like because it says, so it's a transdisciplinary approach, but with anybody who may have any sort of impact on health.
Right. And
that's nice and broad, and perhaps, I mean, that's a pro and a con of One Health that it's so broad. But anyway, it's like anybody who may fall under the health umbrella should have a role, right? And it's about working together. So, but it was interesting what you said at the beginning. But my question to you is perhaps a loaded one.
Excellent.
I'm sorry. So there's things like Health Map and there's things like ProMed. And there's, I mean, I think it's implicitly obvious that computer science has a role in One Health and in health in general. But where do you see computer science in the future? Like, as One Health advances, how do you see computer science advancing with it, or how would you see as that role? Like,
okay, so I don't think that's too loaded. I think that's a good question, actually. From my point of view, computer science, there's already a lot of things computer science can do for, and it's doing for public health on some level. There's the new tech that comes out, you've got the wearables, people wearing Fitbits all the time and, trying to be active and all that kind of stuff. So there's that element of it that's sort of moving towards health promotion. There's also the computer science side of things where, doctors can relay medical information easier. There's the idea of collecting or understanding epidemics by using social media feeds, all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that public health can gain out of the use of computer science. I think it's just going to be continuing to build on all of that sort of stuff. And the more computer science is exposed to other disciplines, especially related to health, like there's a lot of stuff that we can get out of that. The other side of it, I think, that's relevant is the big data and data science side of things. The more that, we're collecting more and more and more data on everything. Computer science is completely essential to making sure that we can, collect those data, manage those data, and actually figure out what those data are trying to tell us. So I think that's the biggest contribution that'll be coming in the future is the data science side of things. Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious if was it Gillis, the community, if they had a concern, like a lot of our Northern Ontario communities with roaming dogs. In your experience when you were there, was that? No? Okay.
That wasn't brought up.
No?
It was.
No, I not that I know of anyway. Like a lot of the dogs that are there, like they are usually like handicrafts.
Yeah.
Like that. And because the community is so remote, there's a lot of like dogs coming from other places. But yeah. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, to be honest. So.
It's a concern in Northern Ontario. The One Health and public health community and veterinary community have been talking a lot over the past couple of years about the dog population in Northern Ontario. So I was just curious if it was the same in that community.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, so could be, but no idea.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I was just curious about this adaptable app that you're making specifically. So you said you're trying to make it so that it collects the information that people in that community want to use. So is this an app that will be customizable if you say took it to a different community where they had other concerns and then they could pick what they wanted to collect there and that sort of thing? And I'm also insatiably curious about exactly what they thought was important, if you found there was anything in particular that was like, oh, never thought of that, but it is.
Constantly thinking that. In terms of the app development, right now we're focusing on Revitalization. It will be, like it's always, well, it should be designed so that it's easily expandable and robust and that sort of thing for changes. Revitalization is the pilot community, but the other communities of Nunavut will also be included in the future. And we are designing it with a bigger vision of data collection and data return, I guess is one way of putting it. We're keeping that in mind for a longer term project. But right now we're just trying to make sure that whatever we develop in Revitalization is useful. And if we can show sort of the proof of concept there, then it'll be easier to bring it to other communities. In terms of the things that they've identified that are relevant or surprising, honestly, like there's so many times where we're in conversation with the people in the community and you get chills, and not because it's cold. I mean, you get chills listening to these people because the stories they tell, the passion behind it, I'm just like, oh my God, I've never thought of that. And I remember there were a couple of moments where someone brought something up and I'm like, oh, that's so good. I know it was this wasn't particularly for collecting public health data, but it was an idea of how they could use the app, that's working towards the engagement thing, but how they could use the app to also sort of crowdsource Indigenous and traditional knowledge. And that, like, I think all three of us, when we heard that, because Lex was up there as well with us, I think all of us sort of immediately got shivers, like, this is an incredible idea. But constantly we're getting these sort of this feedback from the community, and it's phenomenal. It's a great job. I love what I do. So
just to add to that, the fun part about what I do for this is also trying to reiterate what the important things are, so it's some manageable thing, because everyone wants to collect everything with this, right? So it's kind of knowing which ones to do.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, we've got to start off simple. So next week we'll be chatting with the rest of the team to talk about what the short-term goals are, what the long-term goals are, and all that sort of thing.
everything's interesting.
Yeah, oh my God, it's amazing up there, so.
If I may, I have one more comment. You were talking about the future of computer science and One Health. And one of the big issues that we see a lot, you mentioned big data, is actually data integration between databases and that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
There's lots of databases out there, there's lots of information being collected, like you said, but a big problem is actually getting databases to talk to each other.
Oh, yeah.
So that you can actually glom everything together.
Yeah.
So that would be another big role I would see with computer science, is making sure that all this data is being collected by different groups is actually able to be put together.
Yeah, that's all part of the big data umbrella and data science. So a lot of data science working on how to make that the most efficient and flexible and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's huge. So lots of data.
Any other question? Well,
Cool.
let's thank our speakers again.
No
I
worries.
think we are now ready to smoothly.
Very smooth.
Another block of speakers. And this will be the theme of the next block is going to be Indigenous health and climate change, and it was presented by Alexandra Sawatzky and Kaitlin Patterson. A few words about Alexandra first. She's currently pursuing her PhD in public health in the Department of Population Medicine. Her interests lie at the intersection of human and environmental well-being, and how good well-being is conceptualized and created by Inuit in Canada. Alexandra is passionate about qualitative approaches to interdisciplinary health research, something she developed while working on her during her undergrad program at the University of Guelph. Kate is a PhD student in population medicine and international development. Her master's in health geography from McGill University focused on climate change and food security among indigenous Batwa of Kanungu district, Uganda. And she continues to work with this group. She's currently working on eco-health-centered projects examining food security and nutrition in the Arctic, Peru, and Uganda. Kate uses a community-based participatory research approach and incorporates both quantitative and qualitative methods into her research. Please welcome our speakers.
So hi everyone, I'm Alex and this is Kate, and we're here to talk to you today about Indigenous health and climate change. We work in very different parts of the world. My research is based in Nunatsiavut, which you heard a little bit about in Oliver and Dan's talk, and Kate works, her research is in Uganda. But despite these disparate geographic locations, we share a lot of the same experiences and perspectives on what we've learned so far from the communities we work with on climate change, the environment, and well-being. So climate change has a diverse array of impacts that are both direct and indirect on health and well-being, and these experiences of climate change impacts are incredibly localized. So we're going to talk a little bit about engaging with communities to understand how health and well-being is defined and how climate change is experienced in different locations in order to work together to develop solutions and adaptive strategies for dealing with these challenges. So Nunatsiavut is in Labrador, as Oliver described. In Inuktitut, it means our beautiful land. It's comprised of 5 communities. You heard about Rigolette in Oliver's talk. The other communities are Nain, Hopedale, Makkovik, and Postville. Inuit in Nunatsiavut and throughout the circumpolar north are experiencing dramatic and rapid changes in ways of life. These stem from a long and difficult history of colonization, forced settlement, and land dispossession that are now compounded by the intense environmental changes such as climate change and resource development and extraction. However, despite these changes, Inuit are an incredibly resilient group of people. They are finding ways to adapt while also preserving their rich history and culture. They hold deep intrinsic relationships with the land that are essential to their well-being and survival as a distinct people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the backstory behind what Oliver talked about. So how do we understand how the environment and health connect in order to develop these solutions and strategies as we move forward? So first, connecting the environment and health. For Inuit, as I mentioned, the environment and health are inextricably linked. They often don't talk about health without talking about some aspect of the environment, and vice versa. They're very intertwined, and it's important to understand that moving forward, developing these public health strategies and solutions. And also, environmental changes have both direct and indirect impacts on health and well-being across all dimensions: physical health, mental, emotional, social, spiritual, what have you. And understanding these connections and how they impact health and well-being is really important to understand how to develop and support more holistic and comprehensive research efforts. So understanding how health is defined and how well-being is defined in the context of the land, and how people are already achieving and sustaining good well-being is super important in any type of research when you're looking to improve well-being and support efforts that are already being done. To illustrate this point a little more, Inuit in Nunatsiavut describe the land in several different ways. It plays a role as a connector. So not only do they feel connected to the land, but when they're on the land, they feel more connected to their ancestors, to their family, to their friends, and to themselves. It's also described as kin, so a family friend, a family member, a close friend, something that's capable of reciprocity and deserving of respect. The land is also a teacher. It's where traditional knowledge and culture are rooted, and it's the best place to learn, to use, and to pass on this knowledge to each other. Finally, understanding the land's role as a healer is essential to understanding these pathways to locally connected health and wellness. As I mentioned, the land, or well-being, is defined across all dimensions, and the land is healing across these dimensions for Inuit in Nunatsiavut. So physically, emotionally, socially, mentally, spiritually, across everything. Within the land's roles as connector, kin, teacher, and healer, there are several different pathways that Inuit have defined that they create and pursue to achieve good well-being. The first being cultural revitalization. So being on the land or in the community, learning about culture, celebrating it, passing it on to each other, and sharing these experiences is really important for good health and well-being. Also, building supportive relationships, so spending time with family and friends, and just sharing experiences, stories, and going through everyday stresses to larger struggles, just being able to talk with people who can share those perspectives is really important. Finally, strengthening sense of community is an important pathway to good health and well-being at the individual community level. Participating in events and activities and everything like that instills a sense of belonging to something that's bigger than themselves. So all of this work, all of these kind of concepts, we couldn't just go in and assume that we knew what well-being meant or what the land meant. All of this work has been done with the community, and all of these definitions are coming from them. So moving forward, it's really important to incorporate this into everything we do. And this is a quote from one of the community members in Nunatsiavut that kind of brings everything together, and it's quite beautiful. The land is important because it gives you freedom to be out and see it. It's where our ancestors were before, and we follow their footsteps. It gives us freedom to see not only us, but people and wildlife, to be surrounded when we're traveling. It's good to be out on the land. It helps people's hearts feel better. And that just kind of brings everything together, and the land, what the land means and how it connects people to their own sense of well-being, and then to this community sense of well-being as well. So giving these understandings and what we've learned so far, moving forward into community-based participatory research, such as what Oliver was describing, how to adapt to these changes and how to work with communities to collect information and use it in relevant and meaningful ways. It's kind of like the core of everything we do. So community-based participatory research is this meaningful engagement of communities throughout the entire research process. So those who are experiencing the impacts of climate change and the problem should be the ones to define it. They should also be the ones to develop the solutions. So it also seeks to expand and enhance local capacity, so building on the knowledge and wisdom that's already there. And then it focuses on building lasting relationships and engaging in a process of co-learning. So learning together, working together, moving forward together. And finally, when working with Indigenous peoples, it's premised on a commitment and contribution to reconciliation. So, I'll just steal that. Great. I'm going to be going somewhere a little bit warmer now. Yes. So, as Alex kindly pointed out, Indigenous people around the world have faced similar narratives of land dispossession and colonialism, and continue to face ethnic discrimination as a result of their social status. So I will take you now to Uganda, but talk about how, while they have these shared experiences, a lot of the environmental relationships with health are very context specific. So in 2009, the Lancet Commission on Climate Change stated that it was the greatest or biggest threat of the 21st century for health. Most of the projections stated that there would be increased burden of food insecurity, malnutrition, spread of disease, and in sub-Saharan Africa, we're looking primarily at extreme weather events, prolonged droughts, higher temperatures, and changes in precipitation patterns. And how do these actually interact with health? This is a diagram by the CDC. Primarily, what we've mapped so far on a population level will have impacts from air pollution, changes to vector ecology, increased allergens, increased decreases in water quality, environmental degradation, extreme heat, and severe weather. This is not only important for humans, but also for animals as well, and those relationships interact, particularly for zoonotic diseases and food security. Oops, wrong one. So I'll take you to where I actually have done some work, and this is in the Batwa communities in southwestern Uganda. They currently live in 10 settlements. In 1991, they were evicted from their homeland, the Bwindi National Park, due to the establishment of the gorilla sanctuary. So we saw that there was increased encroachment on the forest and a loss of land habitat for the gorillas. And similar to what's happened in North America and South America, we saw that they did not promote a good process for doing this, and so overnight the Batwa were evicted without compensation. They currently live in an agricultural setting, so they've tried to adopt a sedentary lifestyle. This has been really difficult. We can see that and the health impacts of that through their quite short life expectancy of about 28. This is about half of what it is in Uganda. In Uganda, it's 57. So we're seeing quite an amount of inequality and inequity. And their mean annual income is about $160 US a year, but this is at the household level. So most households have between 6 and 8 children. So if you split that up, it's not very much. Most of my research has been on food security and the impacts of climate change. It's really hard to actually do research on climate change at a local level. A lot of the impacts are long lasting. So what we did is we looked at seasonal variation, and we looked at how the Batwa might be impacted if they had increased seasonal variation, which is predicted with climate change. So as you can see, we have about 98% through most of the seasons of families being the worst food security category. So that means they're very, very food insecure. It's actually the highest reported in the published literature. And we see there's a slight pattern. There's a significant association between increased food insecurity during the dry season, which makes sense. Their harvest season is in the rainy season. But it's not so straightforward. So when we're working with communities, we want to see not just what's happening at the population level, but what's actually happening with experiences and why things are happening. So interestingly, the Batwa are obviously chronically food insecure. So
while we were looking at seasonal variation, we also were confronted with the reality that they're always food insecure. So the variation we saw wasn't particularly high. That's not to say that there isn't a big variation. The scales we have just aren't equipped to deal with such severe food insecurity. So in most of our work, we've actually developed increased scales to capture that variation that was happening. So we found that food insecurity obviously was impacted by severe weather events, but this is both in the rainy and dry season. And that's something that we need to be concerned about. A lot of efforts are focused on certain times of the year. So there'll be resources set aside for the famine season or the dry season. But with food security and climate change, we're expecting both increased precipitation, unpredictable precipitation, and drought. So you need to manage both of those and be aware of that. And obviously, there's also seasonal variation in health impacts. So we weren't sure if we would see this at the hospital level, and in terms of data, we didn't really. When we were doing our interviews with our local key informants at the hospitals, they said that there was an increase during the dry season in food insecurity and resulting malnutrition. Malnutrition is a bit complicated because it can be acute and chronic. So when we were in the communities and taking malnutrition measurements, we found about 10% of children were food insecure through an acute measurement, but we expect there to be a lot of chronic malnutrition. This is also very hard to measure, as this is typically done through stunting and height, weight for height measurements. The Batwa are an Indigenous population, but they're also a pygmy population. So this makes some of our standard measures a bit difficult. So what does this mean for climate change research and One Health? We found that climate associations with health outcomes should be treated as non-stationary, both in the global scale. So obviously, as Alex was mentioning, there's very different relationships, there's very different circumstances and events that Inuit in the Arctic face versus the Batwa in Uganda. But even within Uganda, we found that different groups of people based on their social status were impacted by seasonality in the environment differently. Those that had animals also interacted with climate change differently. So these are really important things to acknowledge moving forward. Two, improving current health outcomes is so important for building future resilience and reducing sensitivity to the negative impacts of climate change long term. And this is really an important step, because if populations are vulnerable now, that's a big indication that they'll be vulnerable in the future. And a problem with a lot of research or climate change results is that we find poverty is the biggest predictor of being sensitive to climate change outcomes, and that is categorized as a separate endeavor. So it's usually poverty is not included in climate change adaptation scenarios, but that is one of the biggest adaptations to climate change, is reducing poverty long term. And last, we need to look at the complexity and heterogeneity of environmental impacts in those relationships. And we found that in both of our work and the work that you were describing, that mixed methods is so important. So while the data has a huge role, you need to ask how that data needs to be collected and how it can be used in a practical way for the populations you're working with. And using practical applications should be the driving force in this type of research. We want to see these realized as adaptations and forces for positive change. And I guess we'll just do our acknowledgements, because my last comment's a few slides down. But one of the big things for both Alex and I is acknowledging our partners. This is not work that we do on our own, and it's heavily driven by community interest and desire to build collaborative adaptive measures. So my community partners in Uganda, we have 10 different Batwa communities we work with. We also work with the Ministry of Health in Uganda and the local hospitals and the University, Makerere University. Having these partners built into the project from the beginning makes it so much easier to see real action in the next few stages or when the results happen. And I know that research is really going towards this, but One Health kind of really supports the interdisciplinary and collaborative nature of projects and why those are so important. I think you have a few acknowledgements. Yeah.
Yeah, similar to Kate, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for our funding organizations and supporting institutions. The research wouldn't be possible. But also a big thank you to the communities that I am so lucky to work with and learn from. I've never learned about such deep connections between humans and the environment from any other group of people. It's extremely humbling and I have a lot to learn, but I'm really excited for that and to be a part of the process. So yes, our community partners, our local research coordinators, and obviously our project team.
So to end on a positive note, it's not all doom and gloom. They revamped their message in 2015. So rather than saying that climate change is the greatest threat, they said it's potentially the greatest opportunity for global health in the 21st century. And while that may be a little bit optimistic and cheesy, I think that going forward, the communities that I'm working with would rather look at a positive outlook long term than just focusing on the negative. And this is a great mentality to do that. And I think One Health is a really positive way to incorporate the different aspects that are having drastic impacts on health. So yay, One Health. If you really want references, we have them, but I'm sure you're not interested. Any questions? Oh. Should I turn this off? Okay.
So the communities that were evicted, were they originally 10 communities or were they one and then became 10? Or?
So the really funny thing is that a lot of Western planning assumes that all Indigenous groups are community-based. This group is not. So they lived in smaller family groups, usually with only between 5 to 10 people, and they moved around and then would marry between groups, but they weren't all living together. They weren't part of a communal environment, and now they're all forced to live in settlements. This is actually a best case scenario. So the groups that we work with in Kanungu district were given land by a Christian NGO, very paternalistic, but very helpful at the same time. The Batwa in the district, the next district over, are largely landless and squatting. And the NGOs I've talked to and worked with from there are worried about extinction in the next 10 years for those people. So it's a very complicated situation, a lot of thoughts about colonialism and being grouped into settlements. And it's very complicated. There's a lot of like non-cohesion in communities, and one of the big things that comes up often is community strife. But at the same time, things are developing. It's only been 20 years. So we actually have seen agricultural output improve over that time, and people are able to work together more, and there's a bigger trust there. But they never had to do that previously. So yeah. Yeah.
Just a comment. Just based on your presentation, it almost seems, and I know you talked about studying climate change is particularly hard because it would be a longitudinal study rather than anything else. But I think it becomes very immediate in communities such as the ones you both described.
Yeah.
So you're going to see that they're being affected at a faster rate.
And now. Yeah.
And it's so incredibly powerful what you've shown.
It's scary though too. Like we like talk about climate change and it's so distant from here, and like we try and make it real for people in North America. Like this is what it could mean. Like in 50 years, like 100 million people along the coasts may be in danger of losing homes, and like trying to relate things like big storms to climate change, and it's not real for people. And you go into Uganda and people for the third time have lost all of their crops and they can't understand and nothing will grow and they're eating seeds. And you're like, this is real, like this is happening now. And I think these stories are really important, not even just for the Batwa, so people so we can support them and find ways to increase resilience and focus on that component and strength. Like they're a pretty adaptable population. Like in 20 years, they've managed to adopt agriculture as their main livelihood. And they'd never done that before. They were hunter-gatherers. So they don't have any traditional knowledge, and they've managed, which is pretty impressive, because we as a society here would absolutely be at a loss if overnight we had to move out of our houses and like start growing our own food. So it's a pretty impressive transition, but at the same time, it's so real and it's so like vulnerable that I think these are the stories about climate change and the future that we need to be talking about.
Add to that too, some of the work we're doing right now, so the app that Oliver was talking about, it's really cool because it'll be a way to collect real-time data. So as responding to immediate events, like a lot of people have expressed like their main concern is safety when they're traveling and in the community. So that'll be really useful for that. But then having the website and having this online like secure database, you can track those changes year to year. So it will be a way to look long-term as well. So that's what we're trying to balance right now, is how to respond to short-term challenges as well as prepare for long-term as well.
I'll just talk quickly about another project that we were doing with IHAC, which I think will probably be more interesting to some of the vets in the room. So Donnelly et al., I can give you the links afterwards. She's been looking at how livestock can be used as a intervention tool for malaria spread in this population. And we've seen that it's actually helping reduce malaria in households with livestock. So we're looking at projects doing livestock interventions for both improving food security and for malaria spread. So if you're interested in any of those projects, it's a very big project. So we're both related to the Indigenous Health and Adaptation to Climate Change project. And we have links in Peru, Uganda, and the Arctic. And there's a lot more going on in the Arctic, not just that. But if you're interested, they've been really good at incorporating a lot of aspects of the One Health project. Yeah.
Can you explain to me how having livestock prevents malaria?
So so the link was that with the livestock in the household, it would draw the mosquitoes away from biting the people because they stay in the household. So I should explain, this is a small scale setting. Animals most of the time stay in the household or right near the household. And so they found this significant association between reduced malaria and the livestock ownership. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the Halley Project?
No. No.
And it's human, so it's the health of animals and livelihood improvement.
Okay.
Halley in Swahili means, gosh, I forgot. If there's a term for like betterment of health or something.
Yeah.
And so UC Davis is running this.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, Jonah UC Davis. And so it actually, it's improving livelihoods by improving livestock health, and then certainly addressing and mitigating some issues with protozoa and water health. And so it's, anyway, I can share the information with you guys.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right. On that note, I think we are approaching our time limit. Thank you very much for all the speakers. I think that was fantastic. I think we all learned a lot of good information, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any additional questions. I would just like to invite all of you to again thank all speakers for all their efforts. And don't forget that this series continues. So next Thursday, we are also going to have additional talk in One Health. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for the nice introduction.
Next time, like all the tweets. Okay.